All right. Hello, my name is Galen Rose. I work here for the Center of Tribal Studies downstairs in the basement at NSU. I would like to give a great welcome to our speakers. I'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves since they all say Dr. Eva Garroutte. I promise they're not all Dr. Garroutte, but go ahead and give you guys time to introduce yourselves.
Are you going to read the bio?
Oh. Yeah. Here is it. Oh, yes, the one you sent me.
Yeah.
So the Chickadee and the Woodpecker, translating and learning the Cherokee traditional story, presented by Dr. Eva Garroutte, J.W. Webster, and Alice Jumper Wilder. A previously unpublished Cherokee language story and description and provenance. Collaborative translation, 1 second language learner, and 2 first language speakers. Enabling the story to teach lessons of linguistic analyses, lessons of cultural context, and lessons for the life world. And then the presenters collaborated transitions of a previously unpublished story, and it adds to the existing collection of Cherokee traditions. In examination from a linguistic perspective, adding to the small number of morphologically analyzed texts available to illuminate the linguistics and expressive possibilities of an elegantly complex and endangered Indigenous language. Additionally, engagement among our traditions sorry, my brain is fried today. It's day 4 of the symposium. Additional engagement among our translational team positioned the story within a set of cultural meanings within highly personal lived experiences, further enriching its ability to teach.
So did you want to read my bio to introduce me, or you want me to introduce myself?
I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
Okay. CO, Eva Garroutte, Tahlequah. I'm a research professor of sociology at Boston College, and I'm very pleased to be here today with my co-presenters to tell you about a Cherokee traditional story. But first, I need to tell you a little bit of a story about a story, which is, you may know that Cherokee Nation has a new National Research Center, and at that research center they have an archives. And I was poking around in there and found a very interesting little notebook. It was all in the Cherokee syllabary, and it seemed to mostly record the doings of a little Cherokee Baptist church in the 1960s. But then in amongst all the churchly details, there was a traditional Cherokee story about Cherokee and Woodpecker that I realized had never been published before. And I further realized that it had been inscribed into this little notebook by a gentleman by the name of Mr. Willie Jumper, who, as you can see from the screen, was a very important contributor to the preservation of our Cherokee language and culture, long before we even realized how urgent that was, as we do now. So I also was extremely pleased when I saw where this notebook came from, because I knew that Mr. Jumper is the dad of one of my current Cherokee language teachers, Alice Jumper Wilder. And Mr. Jumper is also someone who was very much respected by my other language teacher, J.W. Webster. So I knew I would have people who are interested in helping me translate the story in this notebook. And given that I'm the one who's learning, I always take the first pass through a document to be translated, wrestle with it as much as I can, and when I can't go further, I finally repair to the first language speakers for rescue. And they fix me up enough that I can go back to it, wrestle some more, get rescued some more, and we just keep going that way. So that's what I did with JW for a while. And when we had a pretty good translation, we turned to Alice for her final review and approval, as we knew she had the ultimate insider perspective on this document. And that's how we ended up with the translation that I'll show. Now, it's interesting enough to have a translation of a Cherokee traditional story that has never been published, but we wanted to go further. The three of us could see that we each had unique experiences of the Cherokee language, but at the same time, we shared the view that our Cherokee stories are meant to teach. And we came to understand that our individual varieties of expertise led us to interact with this story in particular ways that each enabled a different kind of teaching. So here's what I'm thinking. I will read you the English translation at which we arrived together, and then I'll give you some examples of the way that I chose to interact with the story and asked it to teach me. And then I'll turn you over to my co-presenters and let them tell you how their very different types of expertise and experience enabled the story to teach all of us in quite other dimensions. So here's the story as we translated it. A long time ago, the birds named Chickadee and Woodpecker conversed. They bragged to each other, "Knowledge has come to us." And Chickadee asked a question. "What can you possibly find out?" This was said to Woodpecker. "If it's about to snow, I perceive it. That makes me go around weeping," said Woodpecker. "And what about you? Tell me," he said to Chickadee. "As for me," Chickadee said, "if somebody is about to go somewhere, I get ahead of him. I get to where he was heading first. I chirp there at the individual's house at which the other person is to arrive. He is on the way there." "You lie to a whole lot of people. Indeed, you must just be a liar." So Chickadee was told by Woodpecker. "Not at all," Chickadee said right back to him. "This is how it is with me. Whenever I have found out something true, lo and behold, I go around crying it out," he said to Woodpecker. Then Chickadee said this, "But you're just a crybaby and nothing else." So Woodpecker was told. And I guess I ought to check here. Can everybody see my PowerPoint screen?
Yes.
So you're seeing just this? I see somebody raised a hand here. Ellen Cushman in the audience is raising a hand.
Oh, she's probably raising her hand to tell you she can see it.
Oh, okay. So we're good. Okay. So you're not seeing my thumbnails, you're seeing the actual, just the one screen?
Right.
Okay, very good. So, okay, as you can see, this is a nice compact story about two birds that have a certain kind of knowledge that humans can benefit from. As a second language learner, I look at a story like this, and I definitely want to know what it says, but I also want to understand how the words of the story individually come to mean what they mean, because when I can understand that, I get better at reading other things too. Cherokee is a polysynthetic language, meaning that individual words, especially verbs, are built up from many smaller parts, sometimes lots of smaller parts. But the parts fit together, often in a very beautiful way that communicates a stunning amount of information very efficiently. So as a learner, I always want to look at exactly how that happens with every word, and I want to map out in detail what the speaker is doing with the language. So when you approach a text from that perspective, you end up with pages and pages of stuff that looks like this. So those tables separate the different building blocks of each verb and then give them labels to tell you what each part is doing. So a fluent Cherokee speaker doesn't need tables like this to speak good Cherokee any more than the rest of us need a table like that to speak good English, right? Fluent speakers have the kind of mastery, even of this very challenging language, that puts them way beyond needing something like this. But for me, the tables are a kind of shorthand that explains how different parts of words contribute to meaning. and they let me see that this seemingly simple story has some extremely interesting things to teach about what a master speaker, like Mr. Jumper, can do with the Cherokee language. For instance, there's a little wordplay around the word weep. Woodpecker first uses that word to depict himself as this important harbinger of snow, right? But then Chickadee picks up the same word, he does a little grammatical fiddling, and he manages to cast what he does in a superior light. And, that's even before he starts calling Woodpecker a crybaby, right? So it's the kind of thing where I just have to sit back and admire the economy with which it is possible to deliver that kind of nuance. And then when I talked about my analysis of particular words in the story with my co-presenter JW, he made me see even more. And my favorite example is the word ganolaska, or ganolaska, go-e. And if we look up that word in Durbin Fielding's Cherokee English Dictionary, this is what we see. And it tells us quite rightly that this is the word for the wind is blowing. And if you look up this word anywhere, it will tell you that's the word for the wind is blowing. And this word is never shown to take any prefix other than it. It is blowing, right? But when I laid out this word as part of my tables, that let me notice that the storyteller here makes Chickadee use this same verb, it's blowing, only not with the it pronoun. Instead, Chickadee uses it with the I pronoun, and he uses it to describe he himself making a sound, right? So that's what this little red A on the screen here means. That's the first person, that's the I pronoun, right? So that's how I learned it's possible to use this word for the wind blowing in this very different, very creative way to say someone's making a sound like the wind. And, already that's a thrill for me because I learned something I couldn't possibly learn from a dictionary about what can be done with this word for the winds blowing. And okay, there may be a few people out there who are thinking that I don't get out enough, but really, who needs to get out when you have this kind of excitement at home? Right? And then I mentioned this whole thing to JW, and he responded by remembering that his great aunt used this same word for the wind is blowing for the sound that a tea kettle makes when it boils. And that comment let me see something else that our storyteller, Mr. Jumper, was doing with this word, because all of a sudden I get this fabulous picture and I see this little bird, this little cartoon bird, right? And he has news to tell. And he gets more and more excited. He's sort of like building up a head of steam. And he swells up. He gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then all of a sudden he just bursts with sound, right? All I could do in English to translate that word for Chickadee's claim is to say, I chirp, which gives me no word picture at all. But when I combined what I could see from my linguistic tables with information from a speaker with a lifetime of experience in the language, I could see something much more interesting. So that's why I like to use linguists' tools to look at language, but then also ask fluent speakers what they can teach me. So I won't go on further about my tables and how wonderful they are, but if you want to see my tables, you can just contact me. I will share them. So as I continued in conversation with JW and later also with Alice around this story, they brought me to still more insights into ways that this story can teach. So I want you to hear what they can tell you about that. So now I want to invite my panelist JW to unmute himself and start his PowerPoint, and I will introduce him to you. And I need to give him the screen here. So I'm going to stop sharing. Okay.
Can everyone see that?
Yep.
I can.
Wow.
Let me just tell you about JW. JW is a first language speaker of Cherokee who grew up in a traditional Cherokee community and home in Vian, Oklahoma. A United Keetoowah Band and Cherokee Nation certified language instructor, JW teaches in both community and university contexts and offers electronic coursework through his business Think Cherokee. He also supplies translation services to organizations and authors, and has himself authored 2 Cherokee language reference books and a Cherokee language children's book. And so I'm delighted that JW is going to talk to us a little bit now about the cultural assumptions within which a story like Chickadee and Woodpecker makes a different kind of sense than somebody might conclude if they approached it from outside Cherokee culture. So, JW, you have the floor.
Wow, well, don't. So I'm going to begin today by first telling you the story in Cherokee. Tahlequah. Ilahiyo no, chige sai, chige lili, allergies for newton, jun do etan, chi squan, junach no headland, jun dot lock sele no, daginika na ai. Chige lili no, uda tadane, hi uda we sele. Kato ha ust ye liu gets de la ho histine hi, ke sai, ago sele, na chis ko newton. No one. Tani tena ta yiki ka to le of skoi no tao lo is tani to ho utane na chis ko nuza ni hina chis ke no hisin ago sele chika lili I ta ge sa kilo illa la yuena ka yi which lo skoi wak tai which no la skon kilo tika nela na ge sa lu histi kiloi Squiata Yahweh, they had scorn a hoy. Uto hiu a se, he called a one he. I go selling, Chigalili. Had they were do selling. I no say, Uto you go who's the out there, La Hosa. Can you go? They got to little home. Without those selling, she's going to Chigalili no, he without we selling. Chalio, the one. I go, who's the delay? I go sell it. It's good. Wow. So, what does this story tell us? When I hear these kinds of stories, this is what I think of. This story and others like it directly reflect our Cherokee viewpoint of nature and the world around us. Assigning speaking roles to members of our animal co-inhabitants is in itself teaching a crucial lesson. Verbally depicting the animal world as having humanistic qualities teaches us that they should not be viewed as something less than mankind, but as equal. Our language is an outward extension of our inner beliefs as a people, and knowing how we believe and think helps others to then understand that third-person pronoun prefixes, for example, indicate that the one doing the action is either she, he, or it equally. Speaking a language that reflects this principle ensures that we do not view, judge, or accept that they are lesser beings. This view helps us to maintain and promote coexistence and natural balance with every spoken word. And secondly, another important aspect of this story is that it serves as a reminder to what service and kindness these birds, Chikalili and Chisquanuza, openly and freely provide to mankind. The downy woodpecker lets us know when snow is coming, and the chickadee announces someone's arrival. These services can be life-saving, and as such, we show them the same respect, kindness, and love that we would show our own fellow human beings by extending our thanks from a spirit of inclusiveness and equality. And lastly, I'd like to conclude my segment by saying that there are a countless number of elders, Alice being one of them, in our Cherokee communities and those who have gone. And they dedicated their lives and still dedicate their lives to the growth and rebirth of traditional Cherokee life in all its forms. Willie Jumper was one of these individuals, and his work makes it possible for students and instructors to revive and maintain this high quality and fluency of our language that was so greatly cherished by his generation of speakers. So you adon, nigada.
Very nice. Wado, JW. Thank you very much. So now, if you can unshare your screen, we will be able to welcome Alice. And I want to invite Alice to unmute herself while I introduce her. Alice Jumper Wilder is a first language speaker of Cherokee and daughter of the author of the text we examined today. Born into a family well known for their intergenerational commitment to preserving and sharing tribal language and culture, Alice is a Cherokee Nation certified language instructor and a traditional basket maker. She teaches across a range of community settings, often writing her own materials in the form of stories. Alice's instruction reaches audiences ranging from preschool to adult and includes both electronic and in-person formats. It's especially good to have Alice here with us today because as the daughter of Willie Jumper, she has very personal memories of hearing this exact story about a chickadee and a woodpecker getting just a little too big for their britches, their bird britches. Moreover, the more JW and I engaged with Alice around these recollections, the original story propagated, by which I mean this first story elicited other stories, and those stories taught us about Cherokee language as a part of a whole life world that few people experience anymore. So Alice, we're so glad that you're here, and we're hoping you can start by telling us about your early experiences hearing this story about Chickadee and Woodpecker.
Hawa, Wado, Eva, Digwalena, Kadaska, Awanta. And when I was growing up, I can remember my father always told us stories of long ago whenever he was young and was told by the elders. His father always took him to meetings as they gathered around the fire, and the elders sat there and talked for hours at a time, sometimes even to early morning. And he would fall asleep on his father's shoulder while he was listening. And that's how my father learned a lot about these stories and how he began to write in the Cherokee language. He picked up, and I don't know, if you ask me, I don't know how he learned how to write in the syllabary, but later on in years, even as a teenager, he already knew, he had already mastered the writing of using the syllabary. And from then on, that's all he used was writing using the syllabary, because he's always said that that's what Sequoia meant for the people of the Cherokee to do, to connect with each other. This was their own thing, you know, their own way of writing, where nobody else could even begin to take it apart and put it together, unless you were a Cherokee. So as growing up, these stories, like the Chickadee and the Woodpecker, my dad would tell us the stories in Cherokee because we had our home was fluent, and that's all we spoke was Cherokee language. And in the evening times when he came in, he was tired when he came in the evenings. My mom would be cooking and we'd all eat supper. And we really never had the luxuries other people had. My neighbors didn't have those luxuries either. But say, per se, the white people's world, okay, they had better things, you know, and luxuries that we didn't have. So when we got ready to eat for supper, a lot of us had to sit on the floor, okay, and maybe we had to share a plate. And most of the time it was me and my twin brother, well, nobody else. We shared our plate together because we were twins. We thought we were what do you call it? Chosen to be there, you know, as twins. We were as one. That's what you thought, you know. We were different than they were, even though they didn't think we were. So, you know, our older brothers and sisters, this is the way they thought, you know. So anyway, we would eat, and then in the evenings, after he ate and relaxed a little bit, it'd be late evening, about 8 o'clock or 9. He would start singing, and he would sing some songs. And then we would be listening, and then he would call us to him, and he would set each one of us, me and my twin brother, on his knees, and he would start telling the story, and he would bump us up and down on his knees as he tried to lull us asleep with his singing, and he would turn the stories into a song and chant, and as he went along. And anyway, he would say later on, if we would have fallen asleep, we were just listening and going with the beat of it. He would say, whoever falls asleep first will get carried into bed by the one that didn't fall asleep. So I don't know if that helped us relax or what, but I didn't want to surely carry Jerry into the bedroom. You know, I couldn't do it. He was bigger than me. So we would fall asleep. Both of us would fall asleep. And him and mom would carry us into the bedroom and put us in bed. So that's how he used his stories a lot. He had a lot of different stories, and a lot of them were like this, but then there were stories that the elders told about what things went on a long time ago. And he would tell us about his mom, you know, making sure that he had all his clothes laid out and made sure they were ironed, you know, and all this stuff. And that's how my mom did us. Even though we didn't have very much, she sewed every day just about to make sure we had clothes on our backs. Maybe they weren't new, you know, they were hand-me-downs a lot of times because we had a big family. We had 14 kids in our family, so there was a hand-me-down, you know, pretty much every year. And to us, it was new. You know, to us, it was new, even though we saw our brother and sister wearing it. You know, we didn't say, oh, they wore that. We didn't care. You know, we had something to wear, something new. But we were talking about this, me and Eva, yesterday, and was talking about how mom and dad didn't have any kind of transportation when we was growing up. So the neighbors would take care of us a lot of times, and they would bring us groceries and stuff, or they would make a run to the store for us. But on Saturdays, our pastor would come by and pick mom and dad up and take them to town to go shopping at that time. And we already had set in babysitters because of our older brothers and sisters. And so we had that too. We had, well, you could say, well, we had all the conveniences that we needed in our family. But my dad started teaching at a very young age, and the young men from around the neighborhood would come, and they would sit on the porch, and he would teach them. And sometimes it was about the Bible. They want to hear scripture. And all of this was done in the Cherokee language because all the neighborhood, most of it was Cherokee speaking families and understood. And they would gather, and dad would teach them for hours, you know. And the only thing we could offer them would be water and maybe some biscuits and maybe some kind of meat, maybe if we had it, you know. And that's what he would, and maybe a pie, you know. Mom liked to make pies. Her main pie was a strawberry pie or raisin pie. The boys loved raisin pie, especially the Studi boys. And they did like that, you know, when they came. They knew that Minnie, they called her Sally. That's also my granddaughter's name. And they say, do you have that raisin pie or that strawberry pie? You know, we come to listen to Mr. Willie, you know. And so they would be waiting, but they learned too, you know. They didn't just come for the pie. They listened to my dad teach them for a long time. And anyway, this Chickadee story and Woodpecker, it was one of his favorites to tell. And he would talk to them about this story and other stories too. And he would ask them questions after he had told them about the story. And he would say, Kato on done he Nijis on off no heska, to he uyelke sent non ni weska, on ni one yeska, on bloke scab, okay? Skill kayiga, and on that. "Uninojeti," and he would ask them, is it because they were talking about just being telling on each other and how good they were, they bragged on each other? Was that what this was all about? And they would say, klar, he didn't go away, one would say, one of the boys would say. And this was all done in Cherokee. And I wish we could still tell the stories in Cherokee and people would understand them. And that's my heart's desire. Sometimes I think about that, it almost makes me cry that it can't be done no more. And that's how come sometimes I'll get on my own Facebook page and tell and talk to you in Cherokee, and just Cherokee, no English. And some of you have seen my videos, and it's all Cherokee. But it's really something that's really dear to me, the language. So that's why I teach it. And I think that's how come my dad taught it and why he wanted to keep it going. So I remember these stories, and I think how hard the people, our elders, work hard to save this language. And why shouldn't we try so hard? And that's about all I can tell you about the language and what it means to me and what it meant to my dad and the elders he worked with. So Galiliga, Jijatega, Niti Noji Weska, Jalagi Oji Woniska, Oji Noeslaska, Wado.
Ah, well, thank you so much, Alice. We really appreciate that. I think now even more people will understand what I already know, which is that you give a tremendous amount of yourself to what's really a sacred pursuit, to save something that the Creator gave to us through your own teaching. And JW is doing the same thing through his teaching. And so we're all so grateful to you that you are carrying on the example that was set for all of us by your dad, Mr. Willie Jumper. So now I believe the moderator is putting together some questions for us from the chat. And while he's doing that, I'll just put my last slide up here. And we're ready to take questions when you have them ready.
Oh, it looks like for now, someone said Wado, Alice, JW, and Eva.
Wow.
Does anyone in here have any questions? Are there any questions? I mean, looks like one more question maybe in the chat.
Yeah, it looks like Charlie McVicker has raised a hand. Can we acknowledge him?
Yes, 1 second. Let me see. Okay, it looks like I can allow him to talk really quickly.
I just want to say thank you. I think the three of you have probably been the three most important people for me in learning the language, and seeing you present together here and hearing about this story in the archives. And I remember, Eva, you talking at Alice's class and putting together that Willie Jumper was the preacher whose was the bookkeeper whose notebook you had. And I've seen this be a long time in the making, and this was so incredibly special. And I'm so thankful to the work that all of you do.
Oh, thank you, Charlie. Charlie is one of Alice's most faithful students and has shown a particular talent. He hasn't been studying Cherokee for a very long time, as I understand it, and he already has made great strides, and so should be a real encouragement to anybody out there hearing this who thinks that they might like to start honoring Cherokee ancestry and ancestors by doing the same kind of thing. It's eminently possible.
It's like somebody in the audience. Hello.
So I have a question on the story, but first I see
you put up an appreciation that you're going to say. I work at the Cherokee National Research Center, and I work with Ross, and I had the luxury of seeing this translated already from Eva, and I was very excited to see it. I got to see a little bit of sermon of Jumper on there as well. Ross just knew that I was very interested in it. Whenever you guys talk about the long-winded, but also like the crying of Chickadee, I always think about whenever my grandpa used to say the word like "your crybaby," you know, he'd like if one of my siblings or anybody was crying, he'd say "Uyod Shanahi." Do you guys have an understanding of that word, or like it's more appropriate context? And is it similar to the word used for Chickadee crying? So.
JW or Alice, do you want to address that? I definitely understand from my little tables there that those are actually two different words. That there's the word that's used in that story for weep or cry, and then there's this word that my panel of expert advisors here explained to me is this sort of like schoolyard insult that you might say to somebody who is like too quick to like express that they have been injured. But one of you two want to say more about that?
What was it? That's like go lignuesa.
Yeah, that's what you want. Could you say the word one more time?
I'd hear it longer. He'd say "Uyod Shanahi," or like he'd really elongate it too when he started "Uyod Shanahi," something like that, you know. Or I'd also hear my dad, like he's not a speaker, but he'd like Englishize it. And he'd be like, they're Ulioing around, he'd say.
Well, Uliot, that's crybaby. I'm not catching that end part. Hatugis Diane.
Uliota. That's the only thing I know. Uliota, yeah, that's chigesa. When they were describing somebody that was a crybaby.
Yeah.
Okay. You got Uliota, yeah, goes chigesa.
Oh.
Esta hita ito testi yad chigesa. Kalaweri yad lo chaka chigesa. Uliota.
When I heard it, I may have translated it wrongly in my head because on the end part of it sounded like the word creator in my mind. It sounded like that in my mind, so I may have mistranslated the ending. It has been a while since I've heard my grandpa because and you know he's gone from COVID, but it's a word that I always was curious about, and I didn't know if he was putting two words together too to describe something.
Maybe you confused it, and maybe you put those two words together thinking that's the way it was. You know, it could have happened that way. Sometimes we can get ourselves mixed up in saying something that we think we're saying, trying to remember, because I do that myself. Sometimes I have to go over and over something when I'm thinking about a word that I know was there. And so finally, I have to think about it for a little while before I get the end.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Looks like we have a bunch of people in chat. 1 second. People saying Wado. Someone says, how do you understand the competition between the chickadee and the woodpecker?
Well, I think by that, the chickadee and the woodpecker competing because they're bragging about what they're saying, you know, or what they do before this happens or that happens. they're trying to top each other.
Yeah.
And, you know, so finally one gets called a crybaby, you know, I guess you're just lying to them, you know, and stuff like that. It's a competition. They're just bragging about each other. What one is what is great is doing something greater than the other, you know. So I guess they're friends, you know. Or they were friends. You know, I don't
Oh, probably not anymore.
maybe not.
I remember having that discussion with JW here at one point when we were talking about this. And JW, I remember you're saying something like, and here we have two absolutely beautiful animals who are doing something ignorant at the moment, right? And the way I constructed your comments on that was that we can all take heart, right? Because don't we all
Yes.
have these kinds of moments?
Well, that's the thing too. They're behaving in that way, but the story is telling you, but they're still there doing a service for everyone. You know, and it's like saying we all have shortcomings, but you should see through to the greatness that you can give to the community,
Right.
regardless of anything you've done wrong.
Right. You shouldn't call them a crybaby for sure.
Yeah. Oh, what's the nasty?
I remember JW also saying that even when, you know, clearly they've got some character flaws going on at this particular moment, and yet they are also following the instruction of the creator that all of us we can all take them as models, in the sense that they are giving what they have, what they can do, which is to provide certain kinds of information, and they're doing it selflessly, they're doing it without recompense, they're doing it because that was gifted to them, and now they're acting on it. So that can be an encouragement for people to do things that, you know, we all know that there are certain things we should be doing, like, you know, being responsible to our language and our culture, and honoring our ancestors for what they sacrificed, as Alice says, to give us, that they held so dear that they were willing to really invest themselves in preserving things for us. And so we can really be encouraged by the example of beings that just do the right thing, that they know they should do, by taking care of our language and our culture, because other people paid dearly for this.
Yes.
It looks
you
like we
can-
have, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I was just going to say real quick that even though they're calling each other names and they're having this friendly competition, you can still look out the window every day and see that nothing made them stop being who they are.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest thing that when I heard this story, I just thought, boy, more people need to hear that message about no matter what someone tells you or how they're treating you, you can offer something to the world that none of them can. So don't let them stop. Don't let them make you stop being who you are.
Well said, beautiful. So
Yes,
thank you to both of my panelists for being here and giving us the kinds of gifts that only you could give us too. We're really grateful to you.
Go along, since they're going to lead any.
Well, no, Kalialiga. Today that long.
Wow.
But though, thank you all for coming today. If you could please fill out those surveys and get them back to us, you'll be entered to win a free t-shirt. This is also being recorded, and I'll cut out that whole part at the beginning. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties, but if you'd like a recording, we can definitely get that to you. You'll just have to email us at tribalstudies@nsuok.edu, or you can reach out to the symposium on Facebook. But thank you everyone for coming. And then, thank you guys. We'll go ahead and end now and get
Thank
set up
you.
for the next one. Wado.
Bye-bye,
Well,
thanks.